Welcome to We the World's MLK Manifesting the Dream, a series of interactive broadcasts and community service activities that goes from MLK's birthday, January 15th, through February 28th to honor and carry forward the work and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. To see the full MLK schedule, get updates, and to take action and be of service yourself, please go to we.net/MLK. My name is Rick Ulfik, and I'm the founder of We the World and the We campaign at we.net. Today, we will be talking with some amazing folks from the Poor People's Campaign, talking about a moral and economic agenda for the first 100 days of the new administration. In the context of the Poor People's Campaign, which Martin Luther King Jr. worked with back in 1967 and 1968, and he helped to start it. We will be speaking with Brian Mallory, Zilla Wesley, and Samuel Prince. Before we start, I just want to mention that if you are inspired to have a similar conversation in your community, please tell us about it. You can email us at this address, mlk@we.net. That's mlk@we.net. And to learn more about We the World in general, please go to we.net. Okay, let's start with Brian Mallory. Brian is the tri-chair of the Ohio People's Campaign Coordinating Committee and part of the Cleveland End Poverty Now coalition. Upon becoming homeless himself as a young adult, Brian began a personal journey, first as a volunteer in shelters, then as a worker in social service agencies serving the unhoused, and now working as a community organizer for Organize Ohio, and of course the National Poor People's Campaign. Welcome to the broadcast, Brian Mallory.
Thank you, Rick. Just a bit of clarification. I'm the tri-chair, one of the tri-chairs of the Ohio Poor People's Campaign. I do work with national, but I'm not actually part of the national organizers. I'm a local organizer here at our state level.
Okay, thank you for correcting.
I'm here with a couple of my colleagues, one of my fellow tri-chairs, which is Reverend Samuel Prince, and our liaison to the national organizers, Zilla Wesley. So thank you for graciously allowing us this platform. You're always so kind to us. And without further ado, let me just give a brief bit of context. As you stated, the Poor People's Campaign's origin began with Martin Luther King Jr. Back in the fall of 1967. King at that time identified three interlocking injustices. We have revived his campaign. He was killed, unfortunately, in the spring of 1968, just after launching the original Poor People's Campaign. The campaign was relaunched by our national co-chairs, the Reverend Doctors Liz Theo Harris and William Barber II. That relaunch occurred in 2018, which was the 50th anniversary of the original Poor People's Campaign. We relaunched under a national call for moral revival and have identified two additional interlocking injustices, or as I like to say, interlocking evils. And let me just state those. King originally stated systemic poverty, systemic racism, systemic poverty, and militarism in the war economy. In the revival, we've also added environmental degradation and the false narrative of Christian nationalism to those other interlocking evils that keep us stuck where we are as a country and a community. Currently, we are focused on our Justice Jubilee platform. We are doing Moral Mondays where we are focusing on 14 priorities that are a section of our overall platform, focusing on the Biden-Harris administration and the new Congress in the administration's first 100 days and the Congress' first 6 months. These are necessary for us to recover from this pandemic, for us to see the kind of justice and to bring into existence the beloved community that King spoke about. So at this time, I'm gonna toss it back to you. I'm not quite sure where I'm supposed to go from here, but it's
Right.
been a.
Yeah. So, yeah, thanks for the background. Did you want to talk about COVID? Because I noticed that I think the first of the 14 policy priorities is to enact comprehensive, free, and just COVID-19 relief. And I know you had
Yeah,
something to say about that.
yeah, but previous to the pandemic, there were 250,000 Americans dying every year due to poverty. And that did not make news. That is like 700 people every day in our country dying due to poverty. And before the pandemic, we were looking at 141 million Americans who were living at or within 150% of the poverty line. It is vital. These Americans were suffering before then. The pandemic has sort of acted as a contrast die and has penetrated and brought into great relief all the injustices in our society. And the COVID testing, we would like to conduct 2 billion additional COVID tests compared to the 46 million done so far. That's 44 times as many tests and enough to offer 6 free COVID tests to every person in the United States. We could get that with just a 10% reduction of the current Pentagon budget as projected, something like that. We are looking at, in communities of color, amongst our indigenous brothers and sisters, a lack of access and a traditional neglect of healthcare of those societies. And this is our prescription to deal with that. I'll stop there and let my colleagues get in a little bit of this. I don't want to monopolize everything.
Okay. Well, thank you, Brian. And let's bring in Zilla Wesley. Zilla Wesley is co-chair of the DMV mobilizing team and national organizer of the Poor People's Campaign and National Call for Moral Revival. And maybe Zilla, you can also explain what is the DMV mobilizing team. I'd be interested to know more about that. But anyway, welcome to the broadcast, Zilla.
Perfect. Hi, thank you for having me. I am just really honored and happy to be here. So that title was, because, Poor People's Campaign is an organism. So we're always changing titles and positions and all of that. So that's an older one from the June 2020 event. So it's one of those things where we're just gonna, so now I'm a national organizer with the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And I am just here to help facilitate states, make sure people get, talk about Moral Mondays, talk about our 14 priorities, so we can just uplift the people because we can do what we need to do for the people. So I'm here to talk about the 14 policy priorities. We are here, we're trying to do what we need to do to just really uplift. That's why the last few Moral Mondays have been about Mansion in West Virginia and highlighting their struggles, because all of these struggles are connected. Because $15 in a union is a must, because raising the wage to $15 per hour can bring over $300 billion into the environment, into the economy. So it's like, wow, you know what I'm saying? So it's one of those things where we are in like an exciting place. Like this Moral Mondays that's coming up, we're going to talk about ecological devastation, healthcare, and even racial wage and how that's all connected, you know, because like we are really trying to fight the interlocking injustices to really just really uplift the 140 million plus people that are low income or living in poverty in this country. Also, we are connecting and struggling with even that term, low income and poor, you know, what does that really mean? Because that's why one of the 14 priority policies is really to start looking at how we measure poverty, because like we're still using the same like statistics and data and like measures from like the 1950s, 60s. And so much has changed since then, you know? So we are in a place where we just need to continue to like raise from the bottom and just really work together so we can move forward together. So that's it.
Yeah. So, and I'm glad you mentioned Moral Mondays because maybe you could also talk a little bit about Reverend Barber. And I know where I first heard about him was his work with Moral Mondays even before the Poor People's Campaign started up with him and Reverend Liz Theo Harris. And it's so interesting to hear that it's continuing along with, or I guess embedded in the Poor People's Campaign.
So yeah, it's one of those things where we're just moving forward and pushing it forward because it's something, if it's not broke, don't fix it. You know what I'm saying? Because it's a great mobilizing tool, is the speak out, is the highlighting of it. And like Moral Mondays is a staple and it's a nationwide staple now. And it's something where we can just continue to push and also uplift again. And, you know, we do have two awesome co-chairs of the Poor People's Campaign, and them mixing it together, because like now Moral Mondays are a little bit of political education. There are arts with it. It's the flow of how Poor People's Campaign and National Call for Moral Revival works. And that's where it is. I'm sorry.
If I may piggyback on that, Rick.
Yeah, sure.
It's brought allies and like-minded organizations as co-sponsors to these events. You know, we started very small with the Moral Mondays, and that evolved into, as you stated, into the revival of the Poor People's Campaign. And one of the things we endeavor to do is to bring all of the community interested parties to provide a place for us to show that solidarity. The most important thing we do, though, is we change the narrative by changing the narrators. Everything that we are about are putting the people who are closest to this, who are most directly impacted by these policies, giving them a voice, uplifting them through our leadership and stuff, so that they are the ones who are best able to tell the policymakers what needs to be done. This is the raison d'etre, if you will, for our campaign and how we organize when we talk about from the bottom up, raising folks from the bottom up. And that's why we proudly wear the badge of poor people. Some people don't like that word poor, but we wear it as a badge of honor.
Interesting, right. So did you want to say anything further, Zilla, about the...
Sorry. It's one of those things where it's like life of an organizer, you know, emergency calls and stuff. So yeah, because right now we're at a Kairos moment, you know what I'm saying? And that
why don't you explain that?
Oh, a Kairos moment. We're in a transition of life, and we're in a transition of realness. And so we are in a place of, we need to like work hard, because like you can feel it in the government, like people are really at a place, and even the people can feel it, because the insurrection, if you listen to what they say, we're kind of saying the same side, but it's who like politicized them, you know? So it's one of the things is that the people who are going to save us are each other and the people. And that's why I love being a part of the Poor People's Campaign, and because of the fusion movement and the fusion aspect, and having everybody there at the table because we are at a place where we need to just continue this work because like Mansions people are nervous and all of that. So,
Right.
And let me just also state for those who aren't aware, the campaign is very political, extremely political, but we are nonpartisan. So we tag Dems and Republicans alike. We adhere to our policy platform. We're pushing everyone, as I said, to help us establish this beloved community that King spoke about half a century ago.
Exactly. And one thing that Zilla mentioned that made me think of something is the idea of fusion, which other people say intersectionality and that kind of thing. So just looking at the 14 points, the 14 policy priorities, I see, guarantee quality housing, federal jobs program, expand voting rights and civil rights, immigration reform, rights of indigenous peoples, fair taxation, and on and on. So it really is, it's like a document of intersectionality of all these issues that affect everyone. So thanks. So shall we bring you into this conversation, Samuel? Let's do that. So Samuel Prince serves as the Unitarian Universalist Justice Ohio Board Chair. He has served as co-chair of the Oberlin Unitarian Universalist Fellowship Board and in several other congregations as chairs of both adult religious education, faith development, and the anti-racism team. And Samuel is a tri-chair for the coordinating committee of Ohio. Welcome to the broadcast, Samuel Prince.
I thank you so much, Rick. I thank you again. It's the second time that we are meeting, Rick. It's always that we meeting under these circumstances, huh?
Yes, thank you.
I like it. I like it. For me, the Poor People Campaign is about history. And whenever we're speaking about history, it's always gives for me the formation as far as where something starts from. And I love to give this story. I love to give this story about the idea as to when the Poor People Campaign have really sparked. So I will go right into this. And the fact that it was sparked by Senator Robert Kennedy. And sometimes when we think about the Poor People Campaign, we don't think about the Kennedys being involved with this. And Robert Kennedy passed along a message to Marion Wright to tell Dr. King to bring his people to Washington. Imagine that. Bring his people to Washington. And do you know what happened, Rick? Martin Luther King said, okay, I'm going to bring my people there. So Martin Luther King got together with the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and said, we're going to plan this. And they planned it. They had about 50,000 people as to who had showed up. But the interesting thing for me, it's always about the people and who is it that showed up. As what Zilla had said. Zilla said that this was a fusion. So it became a fusion of people. You know, they came from Native American, Mexican American, Puerto Rican. There were white communities. There were Black communities. I mean, they just came and they just flooded Washington. Yes, the fact that it was only 50,000, they were expecting more, but that was enough to actually start this campaign.
Can I add to that though?
Oh, please.
Because even how it affected the DC community, and a lot of people don't highlight that, like it might have just been that many, but it also, the whole DC metropolitan area has connected to that. There are even people who still live here because they moved here during Resurrection City and like never left. So It's one of those things where it's because even my mother remembers like her church taking sandwiches
Oh,
down there, and
yeah.
you know, a lot of other people, a lot of like some of our movement leaders here who uplifted the DC movements have like came out of that Resurrection City time, you know.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where it's like the history's untold, but unlike then now, because also they had we have this great storytelling called the Soul Tent that the DC Library did, telling people stories about Resurrection City, and like that was, and it's beautiful because like you have it all always, because like, you know, the welfare rights movement, that's never highlighted in there. Johnny Tillman and them, and even welfare rights is still around, and they helped us, and they started off the Poor People's Campaign with
Yeah.
the Mother's Day, and then they continued, and then but also DC police unfortunately came up in there and tore up the whole Resurrection City, pepper sprayed people, bulldozed people, and they're still even doing that today to our unhoused encampments. So like the stuff is still repeated, these same tactics. So it's one of those things where I just wanted to uplift that because it's because the history within this time has framed so much and continue to frame, and we still just love the fact like we need to do it. And fusion is a little different than intersectionality.
Yeah, can
Because
you
like,
explain that a little bit? Go ahead.
yeah, because fusion is like really like we're fusing together, like just think we're cooking, right? So, you know, we put our onion and garlic in. Onion and garlic will always stand alone and have their own thing, but together they're melding out for the one purpose. But they're always still going to be onion, they're all still going to be garlic. And that's the thing about fusion movement, is that we are here to fuse together for the one task, and the one thing is to uplift our people out of, you know, then that's everybody, you know, because because this is about the self and the community is fusion, you know, because I'm here, your struggle is my struggle is your struggle, and we'll fight for that. Because especially now we're so used to like being in silos, and silos are a thing. And sometimes like we just need to continue a shift to like, and that's what Poor People's Campaign is about. We are going to fuse together to really do that, because like that's why like the Kennedys were assassinated a little bit, MLK was assassinated, like
Oh, Zilla, you're stealing my point here.
I'm so
Go right
sorry.
ahead.
I mean,
Let
but
me
even
just
like the
let
First
me
on the
just
Left
also
Coalition, you know, uniting the class is a scary thing for people. But yes,
yeah,
Samuel.
let me just say I like it the way Reverend Barber I think put it. This is simply put, we are organizing across apparent lines of differences. We know that when we look down in these issues, there aren't really differences, but there might on the surface appear to be differences. I'm white, you're black. I'm straight, you're gay, or I'm, you know, an Easterner, you're a Westerner, or whatever. But at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We all have a right to live. We all want to thrive. And we know that in the richest society that has ever been in the history of mankind, there is no excuse for any American to be left behind. And that's what we mean by moral fusion. We're pulling all the disparate pieces together. I like Zilla's cooking metaphor because I'm a fat man and a foodie. So, but yeah, and that's a little
Yeah.
bit different than intersectionality. But yes.
Right. So for me, what it sounds like you're saying is the fusion is about the people coming together. Intersectionality is like the causes and maybe the organizations that support the causes coming together. But the fusion is up close and personal. It's the people themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the people and yourself too, because like intersectionality can actually help you become more fusiony, really, kind of. I know that is like, but that's how I see it, because it's one of those things where it's like, first you need to call it out and be self-aware to know what's happening, and then doing it from there. So yeah, to your point, yeah, because we're stronger together, and we're just so used to being like, we pull yourself up by the bootstraps and you'll be good to go. And it's like, we know, like we're humans, you know, we're all together. We're herd animals, you know, herd immunities. it's a thing. So like it's a thing.
I
Right.
want to say also the mere fact that Martin Luther King had never stopped speaking about those issues. He never stopped speaking about race. He never stopped speaking about white nationalists and nationalism and supremacy. So I mean, that was always a part of what his speeches were. But he spoke to the people because to actually set these things up as far as what is needed, the things which solve these issues are policies, right? I mean, if we don't have correct and enough legislature policies, and that is why the fact that the people campaign is highly political. I mean, the policies is a big part of our movement, and the movement it helps us, and it helps us to put together where these policies are, and therefore those who are impacted the most, black, brown, those other folks who are white also. I mean, and that is where that whole entire 140 million there comes in, because that affects us all regardless of what your color is. So MLK had never shied away from speaking about these issues and about the problem which exists within America itself. So one of the things which really had influenced me in being a part of the Poor People campaign is the fact of the way as to how we spoke towards churches about white nationalism. And of course, when we saw what happened there on January 6th, we saw that. We saw individuals there with crosses. Therefore, the negative fusion have also had occurred. The fact that churches became involved with white nationalistic thinking. And that within itself is also one of their points in which Reverend Barber speaks to so much about the fact that churches, sometimes with the backing of politics, have set policies. And some of the policies which has been set have been there for detriment of individuals who are suffering, those who are impacted the most. So the whole movement within itself would really have that spiritual component, but it also have a component for making sure that our government set policies for those who are impacted. And that is where their 14 points comes in.
Exactly. And there are other points that are part of the 14 points. I think Brian, you mentioned earlier about reallocating funds that are part of the Pentagon budget to go directly to ending poverty and some of these other causes. Did you want to say more about that?
I realized, yeah, I could, but you had teed it up, and I'm just looking that I didn't really answer the COVID relief part of the 14 points plan. So
Go for it. Go for it.
I will go back to that.
Yeah.
And these are very specific demands that we have. And I'm just going to go through them in no particular order. We want to mandate the collection, monitoring, and reporting of the impact of the pandemic by race, ethnicity, income, occupation, and geography, and in high-risk congregate settings. This is called decompiling the data, okay? The government is very good at taking large amounts of data, but we need to decompile it by these factors so we can really bear down on where these communities and who is actually being hurt the worst by this. We're demanding equitable and free COVID-19 testing, treatment, and quality care, including mental health care, and safely testing vaccines regardless of income, age, ability, documentation status, insured status, or any other factor. Basically, if you're a human being, you get a shot. That's what we're saying here. First access to the vaccines must be guaranteed to the low-wage frontline workers, as well as our healthcare workers, the elderly, and the most vulnerable. A targeted plan to guarantee access and education around the safety and efficacy of these vaccines, especially in poor and low-income communities. Rick, I'm from the African-American community. We all know about the horrible Tuskegee experiment. Of my grandparents' generation, they, to the day they died, had a distrust of large portions of the healthcare community because of that. I would say my community is no different. Other communities of color and poor communities have reasons to distrust the healthcare industry for their own reasons, but we need to overcome that. Guaranteed adequate income, including rapid and direct payments to all low-wage and temporary workers during the crisis. We're encouraged to see that the Biden-Harris administration is pushing hard for that $1,400 cash payment to everyone. As you can see, that's something we've pressed them on. We are demanding a national rent freeze and mortgage moratorium, as well as a national moratorium on utility shutoffs without credit penalties. This is the heart of a jubilee, a credit jubilee. It's impossible if you lose your job and you're struggling to keep your utilities on, and after the so-called crisis is over, to immediately demand repayment of all that is not realistic. So we demand resources to keep all the rural hospitals and community health centers open, with an infusion of additional resources, particularly to the Indian Health Services. I mentioned earlier that amongst our Indigenous brothers and sisters and in other communities, health services and access to it is abominable. And we need to change that. Permanent protections for Social Security, SSI, SSDI, Medicare, and Medicaid. Emergency OSHA standards for healthcare workers, first responders, anyone else in frontline positions. We also need to have strong protections for people in what are called congregate settings, whether that be mental health facilities, prisons, detention centers, juvenile detention centers, convalescent homes, things like that. We are demanding a suspension of the CPB and ICE enforcement, ensuring emergency provisions are made to all immigrants, including those who are documented. And this we demand just on a basis of humanity. Increase support for public schools to provide continuous, equitable, quality remote learning access during any school closures. And that has to include children with disabilities, and schools to continue to provide social services for qualified children and families. That includes food support for those who are food insecure and other wraparound services. Student debt relief. This is another one that the administration is fighting for in this relief package. The idea that you should not go into crushing debt to get higher education in order to have a better economic opportunities. So those are what we are looking for in the COVID relief part. These measures must remain in place, we feel, until the economy recovers from the bottom up, and we are guaranteeing healthcare, housing, and adequate incomes for all. When you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. And I did not include in that is, of course, the fight to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, oh, sorry, Samuel, go ahead.
No, so I was going to tell a whole story about my first time in meeting Barbara, which is what you're speaking of. But you finish off.
No, because I just wanted to say, because these things and these priorities that we're talking about are, one, ways that we can shift the narrative, and two, like Brian said earlier, Poor People's Campaign and National Call for Moral Revival, we are deeply political and nonpartisan, right?
Yeah.
So we are going to have ways to call out our governments all over because like our siblings and our family in Texas are suffering. They have evicted people even during their snowstorm. So they went on a docket from like 100 people and that has doubled, you know? So it's one of these things that it's happening. And even some of the places that already have pulled back the moratorium have been connected to COVID, oh my God, I'm having a brain fart. COVID rates of like highness to it and also COVID deaths and even like personal story. A good friend of mine, his family died. His cousin died during COVID and not from COVID-19, but he was in a rural hospital out in Indiana. And by the time they cleared him to get to the hospital where that could help his condition, he died on his way to the hospital to get extra help, you know, because like our rural community is not being taken care of too. Our city communities are not being cared for either. So it's like not like a rural or, you know, urban thing. It's not indigenous versus like non-indigenous. It's like everybody is having issues. And like, because sometimes you have to see it as a funnel, like some people have it harder than others, but we just gotta acknowledge it from all levels because like somebody's really hurting our people. And like, it's gone on far too long because we aren't in a place like we need to continue to get into step because COVID just put a big highlight, spotlight, fireworks, you know, that thing that the guy does at the airport on like poverty in America and how violent it is. Because like, let's even acknowledge we are over 500,000 people died from COVID this week, you know, and the slow churn out rate of, you know, I even hear like some places they're wasting vaccine on purpose so they can't get to certain communities. They're not trying to even, like some of my colleagues, you know, even rural Delta region, they're not even trying to roll out vaccination programs there too. Like people are just right now trying to survive, trying to struggle to get water. We have one of our organizers who's out there trying to deliver food and water. We have other organizers who are, you know, they either do a food distribution thing. So it's one of those things where it's like we do a lot of work and like fusion work and moral work, because at the end of the day, no matter like who you are, like we all can't just sit by and just see people hurt people and hurt ourselves without us having to stop and take a moment. And at the end of the day, we vote people in, we can vote them out. And that's also some of the mindset we're trying to change. Like we, the people, like we're a part of our democracy, the Constitution, like the preamble is like more perfect union. And like we, like even just sit there and read it. Like I know people argue, well, the founding fathers were all slave owners and racist. Yeah, that's true. However, they're all dead now. So we can write our history and we will win. Because like, what is the saying out there? The winners frame the history. And I believe that we will, like, we have to believe we're winning. We have to reframe the history. We have to really just really see what's happening. Because like what's happening here is happening in Texas, which is happening in California, which is happening in a lot of places. And to a lot of people, like if they keep rolling back stuff that people can't end up paying, like in reality, who's can pay? Because like even myself, people are like, you know, I graduated in May, and they're like, you know, what are you gonna do next? Are you gonna go to graduate school? No, I'm not going to. Because why? I can't, anxiety wise, I can't be okay with student debt because I have friends who over $100,000, $200,000 in student debt. And like, where are these jobs coming from? Because we are now at a point where we need to ask really quintessential questions about society and morality and where we're doing this country. And that's why I believe the Poor People's Campaign, we're asking those questions. We are struggling through it with each other. And we're just trying to make it look and bring those questions out. Because like simply, if we just even do the simple thing, like $15 an hour, can uplift a lot of people. So.
Yeah, I surely appreciated that. When I had looked at the 14 points which came out, it's it speaks to a moral and economic agenda. I always think about the very first time in which I heard Reverend Barber speak, and I'm standing there, and I saw Reverend Barber, and he was speaking about the fact that America needs a heart transplant. It needs a defibrillator, and I was like, oh, really? You know, and the more I begin to learn about what he was saying, I mean, this was about probably 4 or 5 years ago, not even knowing the fact that I would become involved with this work. But when I think of the moral part, the changing of people's hearts, and then we think of the economic agenda, how is it that we all would feel if we all had that 40 acres and a mule? You know, that that's the kind of things as to which we could have, which is there for us that we could have. I was listening to a report last week that says that there is enough land. There's enough land in this United States of America for every person to have food, to be out of poverty, to be out of the things in which we truly need. I love a quote also in which Reverend Barber had said within the 14 points. He said, if America does not address what's happening with visionary, social, and economic policy, the health and the well-being of this nation is at stake. What we need is a long-term economic policy that establishes justice, promotes the general welfare, rejects decades of austerity, and builds strong social programs that lift society from below. And that's what we need. If we don't have people who we elect to have that vision and to have that social and economic policy, the same crap is going to be going on every 2 years and every four years, because it's going to be just that small amount of 1% or 2% who is going to be living off the backs of people. I mean, I am still working. I've been working right on through the pandemic. What happened if my insurance get lost? What happened if my job lays me off? So sometimes we think that we're benefiting or in some ways, but that slightest thing that moves us off from that scale, is the things in which we're accustomed to could actually put us within a certain barrel. So it is an utmost need for me, that when I look at what these 14 points are, I mean, it is so reflective in the ways as to how this whole system in which we're having, and yes, it's a system in which we're having, is failing us. And this is why we need that to hold folks accountable as far as these first 100 days. And these are the things in which Martin Luther King would do. I mean, these are the things in which he was actually speaking of. I mean, when the Civil Rights Act was being formed, and when he went to Washington with LBJ and said, yeah, I'm going to come and you're going to sign this. This is the kind of attitude in which we need.
Definitely. And I love that idea, that Reverend Barber said America needs a heart transplant. Very, very interesting. I was wondering if anybody wants to talk about the Jubilee concept and maybe give a little bit of background about that. I don't know if everybody understands what Jubilee is based on and how that could actually work as part of this kind of platform from the Poor People's
Let me kick it off first, Brian and Zilla, that the word Jubilee really comes from the Bible too. It has a biblical meaning. I mean, the Jubilee is about a repaying of debt. All right, and every 7 years there was, there was always things being repaid. Slaves back then, slave was being returned and so forth. So it was always a repaying of debt. So when the Poor People Campaign speaks about a jubilee, it's about a repayment, and this is what we need. I mean, Zilla spoke of student debt. I mean, student debts is so enormous. I mean, I didn't finish paying my student debt until I was 47. So I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I mean, that's a long time, and I was still paying on that. I mean, health care. What is it that we're going to do if the fact that if I get sick right now and my insurance only covers certain things, I mean, that comes out of my money, and therefore, how do we repay? So, Brian or Zilla, I pass it over to you.
Yeah, I am not an eminent theologian as my dear co-chair brother. I'm just a pastor's kid, and in my faith tradition, yes, we speak of Jubilee, and as Samuel said, it's about debts, and more importantly, the forgiveness of those debts. I believe in my faith tradition, in the Old Testament, like he said, every 7 years there was a reckoning of everybody's debt, and then strangely enough, every 7 times those 7 years, which would be 49 years, math challenge folks, the 50th year was the Great Jubilee, and tremendous things happened after you go through those 7 cycles of the little minor jubilees. And to piggyback on Zilla's point, and what we were kind of alluding to before in terms of a Kairos moment, that's also what we feel is part of this. It's not coincidence, I don't think, that we are talking about something 50 years after King and allies are presented that. That's almost spot on with my faith tradition and the Bible talking about those 7 jubilees, the 7th jubilee, and that 50th year is the grand jubilee type thing. But we do see the need across all aspects of our society, the need for this. And it dovetails nicely into our call for a moral and ethical revival of our country. If you look at a budget, whether it be federal, state, or local, as a document, a moral document that sets out what that community, that society values, then we must, as a moral and ethical people, hold our elected officials accountable for the policy violence that they inflict amongst our population. That gets into the we the people part of what Zilla was talking about. So that's my take on Jubilee and how it kind of fits in what we're doing.
And Zilla, did you want to weigh in on
Well,
Jubilee?
yeah, because Jubilee has been around for like the word, in the, for the Black diaspora, Jubilee was, the time after emancipation also. So Jubilee has been around and is the word, and, Samuel, I go to church sometimes, so, I'm a theologian in my own right, JK. So I say that to say, I know I wish, because they are very well studied, but I'm studying in a different way. So if you even look at Martin Luther King's Beyond Vietnam speech and some of his other stuff, because even I have some great books, like people like this one, A Call for Conscience is a good one. Also like Letters from Birmingham. So people can really see the mindset of that, and even how sometimes the churches did let him down in movements, because this is a scary part, the morality and what does, and also I don't want to but the PBS special too, if you watch that about the Black church, it skirts on some of the conversations we're having now, or this conversation we're having now, and uplifting, because the Jubilee platform is super important, because it's really, calling out what's happening, and all of this is attached because the system wasn't built in a day and it's not going to be taken down in a day. So each level we have to do. And even Brian said something about the 50-year Jubilee, because even when we launched the Poor People's Campaign and National Call for More Revival, it was 50 years after MLK's launch of the Poor People's Campaign. And if you read the Soul of Poor Folks, the moral audit, like it shows that we haven't gotten better as a society. We've actually gone backwards. So it's one of those things, like, and also just want to like shout out to our policy team, because like Poor People's Campaign, the Cairo Center, and Repairs of Reach have like bomb policy people who are really, and also the other policy group we work with, I feel bad that I don't know their name, but they are also like really awesome, because like it's very thoughtful, thought out policy that is backed up with narrative and people's story. Because sometimes data is just like, 3% of people do that. And in reality, these 3 or 30 or however many percent of people are actually people, and they aren't having a place to live. Their internet's unstable. They don't have any water, and it's so many things. Like, we just don't let it data. We are about people, and that's what's so important. And the Jubilee platform is something to read, because it links to even our 14 priority policies. It links to why we do our Moral Mondays, because all of this we're trying to fight the interlocking injustices, and our tactics have to be interlocking as well.
Right. So for me, an important point is, how do we move from where we are now in this country and by extension around the world to actually making these kinds of ideas so obvious that they just happened, and the question is, what we talk about a lot with We the World is moving towards a we-based society where the health and well-being of each and every member is considered essential to the health and well-being of the whole. Now, it seems like we're at a point where this kind of idea has to be just intuitive, and it's like on the front pages of all the headlines. Because if one person gets COVID in your community, you're all in danger, right? Everybody's in danger. So it's not that far to go from that to, if one person is homeless in your community, then the whole community is endangered. Or if one person is discriminated against, and on and on. So I hope that this is a moment when we can make that shift, and it's like a cultural shift, right? From a me-based society where you're not worried about the consequences to others, to a we-based society where the consequences of others are your consequences, right? So how do we make that happen? Because it isn't, the policies are important, but that's like laws and everything, and all of that will come along if you have this shift in the culture that, like we're talking about. So how do we make that shift?
Good question, Rick. We are community organizers, and we know that we need to change the narrative by changing the narrators. That's very specific. There's a saying, familiarity breeds contempt. That is absolutely wrong. That's another false narrative. Familiarity breeds understanding and compassion and empathy. This is why we organize across what are apparent lines of difference. If you just look from the outside, this is why we struggle to reach out to those who are most directly impacted and uplift their stories and empower them to tell their stories. Reverend Barber says we have to break the heart of the nation by telling these stories in order to heal the nation. It's hard to in my faith tradition, there's a story of the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan. Given the results of what has happened over the past year with the unrest in our streets, the insurrection that just happened in January in our nation's capital, there is a lot of hurt and pain, and people are expressing that. We can no longer willfully look over that Samaritan that's in the ditch on the side of the road. We can no longer step over to the other side of the road to avoid looking at that Samaritan. I'm sorry, the Good Samaritan was the good guy. I'm sorry, the traveler who was accosted. Everybody across all walks of American society was appalled at the murder of George Floyd. If seeing something like that in our society was not enough to galvanize you, to take off the blinders and become a part of this, it's hard to imagine what would. COVID has just accelerated that. Just simply put, our job is making people aware that they have power, and they have power by coming together and exercising that power. It's right there in our Constitution. We have plenty of historical points where this has happened in our country, and we know that this is the way you build that we mentality. People need to know that if you are without, or you are bereft, or you are deficit, filling that deficit for you does not take anything away from me. We've been fed these false narratives that it's an either or, but it's not that way. There's more than enough abundance. Lies of scarcity and self-determination and all of that is what we are dedicated to changing those narratives. That kind of fake news is what we're going after.
Also, it starts with unlearning some stuff and like using words like we and collective, and just really understanding, like, I can't remember the quote right now, but like the guy did it like, at first they came for like one group and I didn't do anything. And then, so it's like that as well. And it's because like everything will eventually come up, because, it's a big group of people who are like 1 to 2 emergencies away from being homeless themselves, or like struggling with rent. So it's something where in economists and articles and everything that we've been read and we've been taught and we talk as a collective about and with, like, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Over 30 to 50 million people are slated to get evicted. And then if we have ecological devastation that happens, like in Texas, people didn't work that week. So if you were already on the edge and then you're not going to get paid for last week because of weather, you are probably tumbled over by now, because all of this is a ripple effect, and people just need to understand and just start using that. Also, something else is like, let people be a part of unions. Like, let's not pit tip workers against our other low wage workers, because like that's even a challenge right now. And because even just working with the past few more Mondays and learning so much what's happening to our people who are staff in these restaurants, how like women are being harassed to take down their masks so they can get a tip. It's like people said, take down your mask, I'll give you a bigger tip if you're pretty, And so like all of that says where we are morally as a country, because that tip could be her lights, that tip could be her medicine, because she's already not even making a basic minimum wage. So we just have to continue to uplift each other, because like making 15 can change a whole lot of people's lives. Also, our work shouldn't be, because sometimes, like, and to your point, Rick, we also need to help and encourage our politicians to change some of our policies, because like how our employment is connected to our healthcare says something. So if you don't have a job, you don't have healthcare sometimes, unless if you live in a place where like
So
with
what?
our personality. So it's one of those things where we just got to uplift that as well because it's so much happening out here. So we have to just start rethinking who we are as people, unlearning some stuff, help support and change policies, and go from there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What
definitely.
I would say, as far as an answer to your question, Rick, is the fact that we all have a platform. I mean, we all could do something. I mean, and therefore, is that something that we could do, whether it means learning about whether it means getting involved with the people campaign, whether it means just as far as knowing and looking at the landscape and where we are, we all could do something. And to not do something, for me, it would be dishonest. I mean, the mere fact that when we see the fact that someone within your community, I like to say that there's always communities within communities. I mean, not everyone is the same. So as long as you could coalesce around another community who is serving for the best interest as far as where a specific cause is, get involved with that and know the things and to be aware, just to be aware of the various things in which we're seeing. And because of that, you can change hearts. And once that person's hearts and mind begin to change and to see the issues in which we're having, watch out.
Exactly. So, staying with you for a moment, Samuel, why don't we um, move towards the end and please let people know how they can connect with what you're working on specifically, Samuel. If you want to give a website, then we'll go around and everybody will do that. How,
Well,
how can people
there,
support the work that you're doing, Samuel?
yeah, there is the Poor People Campaign website, it's poorpeoplecampaign.org. You go there, you fill out your name, you put your name, and you put that you're from Ohio, and you will be connected with someone in Ohio. I mean, we're always looking. We want to have this outreach. We meet more people, in which yes, we have those who we have to, but we need more. We need more, and the more that you could join us, I'm saying the more that you could join us. I mean, as to whereby we could organize, we could educate that we could educate, that we're going to be reaching people. So do that. There's a Facebook page in which we have of Ohio Poor People Campaign. Look that up, like it, become involved, leave a question in which you may have, and we will try our best to reach out to you.
All right, that sounds good. And how about you, Zilla?
Well, just to add to that, yeah, everything Samuel said, and I feel like this is like a nationwide thing. So yeah, go to the website, look at our research because they have great fact sheets about all the states that are involved in Poor People's Campaign. They even have some states about like what's happening on the ground with COVID-19 relief. We have one on militarization, childhood, like everything because we are at yeah, and just continue, yeah, and watch more on Mondays so you can see what they're about, see the flow. We highlight people's stories so we can just really look at that. Yeah, and just go to the website and just really, like Samuel said, everyone can be involved in any way, shape, or form. I know it's sometimes harder for people to do some stuff than other people, but just really just start by reading and exploring the options. And there's so many ways that you can get involved. So yeah, first step is just like do your research, get involved.
Get involved, exactly. And Brian,
Yes, I'm just going to pretty much repeat what my colleagues have said. We are a movement. We are not an organization. But the movement that we are building is we want to mobilize, organize, register folks, and empower them in this movement to affect these policies, MORE. So that is our agenda. Make no mistake about it. And we know that the people in this country are ready for this. We know that this is an achievable goal. We work with everyone, some very learned people. We're not a movement that just throws out ideas. As Zilla was talking about, we have policy people, we have attorneys, we have economists, we have very learned academicians who go through this and vet it and make sure it all makes sense, so that when we come and speak to these policy people, we can overcome whatever objections or fine points on this that they want to talk about. But none of that happens. None of that occurs without people, everyday people such as myself, getting involved and feeling the need to get involved and feeling that their voice can change and have an effect. That, here I am, a son of descendants of slaves and indigenous folks who, through the entire, history of this country, if anybody would want to pack it in and say, you know what, this ain't for me and screw it, and I'm just going to take my marbles and go home, it would be somebody like me. But that is precisely what we cannot do. This is precisely at the critical moment. And I'm just asking and letting folks know that, hey, you got to get in the game. If you get in the game, we can make things happen. And that's what we're about. And there are ancillary benefits to this. I just want to take my last little moment of time to say that one of the most beautiful things about being a part of this movement is I get to pal around with people like you've met on this call. I get to meet people in circumstances and working in places and on issues that at first blush I would never have thought I would have any connection to or any reason to connect with. And all of these folks are doing what I'm trying to do, which is start in my little circle of the world and make it a better place and link arms with those others. So we encourage you to do that. You can find us at, as where my colleague said, and we'll see you at the Moral Mondays.
That's so beautiful. Yes. And for my, on my end, regarding We the World, you can sign up for the full MLK schedule, and to get updates and to take action and be of service yourself and with your organization if you have one. Just go to we.net/MLK. And in general, collaboration is fundamental to what We the World is about and what we do. To collaborate with We the World and the We campaign, you can go to we.net/partner. And of course, to learn about all the different things that We the World is doing, go to we.net. So Martin Luther King Jr. spoke about creating beloved community. And that is really what We is all about, and expanding We consciousness, right? So I think we have accomplished what our goal is for We the World with all of our activities. We want to do three things: inspire, inform, and involve. 3 I's that make a we. So we can go from a me society to a we society. So thank you all so much, and bye-bye.